fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren.
Heard on KCC 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery, and I'm Al Warren. On the other side of the country, we've got Mr. David Northeastern Martino.
Yeah, that's it.
Still digging his way out of the snow.
Yeah, surviving the blizzard.
Yeah, well, it probably makes no difference to someone like you, right?
No.
I mean, because you're just hanging out in your basement with your cat.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
not much goes on. As long as they can do the delivery of food, you're fine.
That's right.
You know.
Send me pizza.
Yeah, and you just got to order it a little bit early so that you get it on time.
That's right.
That's
right.
Let them deal with all that stuff. And you probably don't even tip them, do you?
Of course I tip. What are you
Yeah,
talking about?
I can imagine.
I'm a good tipper.
Yeah, I could see. So again, and everything's going good. And of course, we removed ourselves from Spotify. Actually, I put us on Spotify just so that we could remove ourselves, just to make a statement for Mr. Neil Young, and hopefully that helps. I don't know. I'm cheeky. Anyway,
You are.
I am. So now we continue our week of authors. At the last night show with Dean Koontz, I think, went really well. Sounded
Absolutely.
like it. So no complaints yet. Lots of emails, but I won't look until maybe a little bit later.
The mean emails.
Yeah, hopefully it was. I think it went well. So I don't know.
Oh yeah.
He liked it. His agent, his press person liked it. So that's all that matters.
That's right.
But so now we've got someone from the UK. Maybe not. We got someone with the UK accent. So you'll know when I'm speaking. We've got a French author here, and her new book is called A Narrow Door. And this is Joanne Harris. Well, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You see, so listeners, so that's French, just so you know.
Je suis ravie d'être invitée. Merci, messieurs, de votre gentille attention.
That was good. You've been writing for a while. I look at your page here, and it looks like you've been doing this for a little while now. Have you always been a writer, or is this something that started when you were a kid?
I think it was, yes. I always wanted to write. It took me a long time to understand that I could do it for a living. I come from a family of teachers. And I think it was understood from quite early on that I was going to be a teacher and that there was no great option over that. So I remember having a little epiphany when I was about 8 or 9 and going to my mother and saying, you know what, you know how everybody says that I should be a teacher when I grow up? Well, actually, I think I want to write books. And my mother is a rather frightening, authoritative French woman, and there was a rather frightening French silence, and then she just silently took us into a room in our house, which was just piled high with books, all by 19th century French novelists who all died penniless in the gutter of syphilis. And she said, this is why you need a proper job. And so I became a teacher, but I did write in stealth. And sometimes I remind myself that I'm actually a real writer now and not just a teacher on a very, very long sabbatical.
Wow. Oh, there you go. And that's quite an experience to start out with. But so you're a teacher and working in the profession. What gave you the courage to decide, well, you know what, I'm going to publish books. I'm going to send it in and get people to publish it. And I believe in myself enough, because that's I think it's quite courageous to take that step.
Well, I didn't think of it as being a courageous step because it wasn't just one step, it was lots of little steps. And so I fooled myself that I wasn't doing very much. First of all, I wrote something and then I typed it out. Then I thought, what if I send it to some publishers? And of course that didn't work. And so I thought, well, what if I get an agent? And I tried that for a while and eventually I got one until I'd kind of talked myself into some kind of plan. And when eventually my first book was published and it sank without trace, I thought, my mother was probably right. And it was a jolly good thing that I didn't give up my day job. And that went on for another 15 years until finally I started to perceive the possibility of making money from the books I was writing. But no, it took me a long, long time to be an overnight success.
Well, do you feel teaching made you a better writer, or did you need to unlearn certain tendencies that you developed in academia?
Well, no, I think it did make me a better writer. I think because my parents were teachers and my grandfather was a teacher and all their friends were teachers, I was surrounded by stories of teaching from the cradle. And it seemed to me when I was very young that teaching was a sort of factory of stories. And indeed it is, because it's the sort of job where you get to see the same people day in, day out. Schools are just made of drama. They're made of communities. They are communities constantly under pressure, subject to change. And it was fascinating. And so I found myself, when I was writing, borrowing elements from these communities that I inhabited. And then particularly from one particular school that I taught in for a long time, which was a boys' school in Yorkshire called Leeds Grammar School. And it was an astonishing place. It was an old school. It had been founded in 1566, and some of the staff, I'm sure, were the original members of staff. It was a school full of old men and boys. And I arrived there aged 24, one of 3 women on the whole staff. And it was like being transported to Gormenghast. It took me a while to acclimatize, but I thought, this place is fascinating. It's full of stories. And so I collected stories, not consciously, but when I wrote the book that allowed me to give up teaching, which was Chocolat, I realized sometime afterwards that I'd just been using Leeds Grammar School as my kind of story testing ground from the start.
Wow. When you did Chocolat, and it got adapted and it became like a big movie, Johnny Depp and Juliette Binoche. How does that work for you following up writing? When you write after something like that, does that put kind of a pressure on you, or do you feel intimidated by it?
Well, I think the weight of expectation after something like that is so huge that you either get crushed by it or you ignore it completely, which is what I did. I just ignored it. The advantage for me is that I don't live in London. I live in Yorkshire, and it feels like a long way away from publishing and where things are happening in publishing. And that I think kept me grounded, and it allowed me to just keep on with what I love doing. The movie was a sort of farcical, slightly frightening adventure, but it wasn't really much to do with me. I just watched it from a distance, out of the body, if you like, and just went on doing all the things I'd been doing before, except this time I was writing full time, or trying to, rather than writing in my spare time and teaching.
Wow. Yeah, I would imagine that it would have some sort of an effect, but maybe you're right. If you're kind of away from it and not really focusing on it, you can keep moving. But does people and reviews, and when they say things about your writing, when a book and a movie comes out like that, there's a lot of, how do we say, critics and stuff. Did that sort of affect you as well, or did you ignore that totally?
Well, I found it quite difficult to acclimatize because my first 2 books had come out to a kind of resounding critical silence. And then Chocolat all of a sudden was everywhere, and people were talking about it, and it was number 1, and then it was a movie, and then it was up for some Oscars and some BAFTAs. And every time I thought, okay, I have acclimatized. I know where I am now. Some other whammy would come and hit me in the head, and I would have to acclimatize all over again. And so for a year, it was a bit of a roller coaster ride. And there were nice things about it. But one of the things I did find quite uncomfortable was the scrutiny and the assumptions made about me and the stories that were made up about me. There was that the media liked to make up stories. And so they made up a story of, this simple village school teacher who somehow accidentally wrote a book. And so I got a lot of Cinderella comparisons, but they weren't very accurate.
No.
And it was amusing, but it was also a bit startling. I'm happy standing in front of a classroom of kids talking about Flaubert, but I was much less happy talking about myself to people, and I seem to be doing that so much.
Well, it's kind of the world of publishing, especially
it sort
lately.
of is, yeah.
Yeah, especially lately, Well, so you've continued on, and now you've got a new book out called A Narrow Door, or fairly new, I guess, August of 21 here. Let's talk about A Narrow Door. Where does the idea for this book come from?
Well, it's part of a series of books that are loosely interconnected, that they're set in a boys' grammar school in the north of England, which is not unlike the Leeds Grammar School of old. I did say when I started to write professionally that I wouldn't write about teaching. And for a long time, I didn't want to. I think teaching was something that was still so close and so raw. And also some of my colleagues were still alive. And so I think I was waiting for some of them to die, or at least for everything to be further away. But I think that inevitably I was going to write about teaching, partly because it was such a big part of my life, but also because I really loved that environment and those communities. And so I think, the first of those books, which was called Gentlemen and Players, was a kind of homeopathic dose of teaching to remind me why I left. And it's set in, like all these books, in an imaginary grammar school called St. Oswald's. And the hero is a Latin master called Roy Straightley, who is perpetually on the brink of retirement, but who can't retire. The first two books have various dramas and scandals involved, and Straightley always manages to ride these out. The third book in the series, A Narrow Door, is the biggest challenge of poor old Straightley's life, because being one of the old school and being very much the enemy of innovation and suits and chalkboards being made into whiteboards and emails and all these things that he sees as the beginning of the end of the fine grammar school, he's now faced with the school having a woman head who has actually decided to make the school co-ed. And this woman is somebody he's met before. Her name is Rebecca Buckfast. She arrived the previous year as part of the crisis team that was supposed to drag this failing grammar school out of bankruptcy. And she has stayed as the headmistress, and she is extremely ruthless. He respects her, but he doesn't like the fact that she's there. She tolerates him, but doesn't like the fact that he is there. And they're all set for a fairly fraught term when a group of Straightley's boys in his form find a body, or what they think is a body, on the site of one of the fine new buildings that the new headmistress is planning on having built. And so, of course, he rightly goes to see the head, expecting her to report this to the police. Buckfast doesn't want to. It seems that actually she knows rather more about this body than he would have expected. And there is a backstory which emerges little by little in a kind of Scheherazade manner. And so we learn about her childhood and the disappearance of her brother when he was 14, which is the event which has basically formed her and made her who she is. And so it's very much about the old guard meeting the new guard, and women in education, which is something quite close to my heart.
Yeah. Who is Rebecca, Buckfast for you? Like, how do you relate to her? How much of you is in her?
Oh, well, I hope not too much, because she's terrible. She's a monster. She is not the heroine of this book, although I do quite like her in many ways because I understand some, at least, of what she's gone through. I think in these books I've really enjoyed writing villains that could be at least partially understood. And with her, she's a strong woman. She has become the headmistress of a grammar school that has never had girls in 500 years. That has never had a headmistress, so she's a pioneer in some respects, and she has done a number of quite bad things to get to where she is, and she has no desire to let that go or to allow anybody to topple her. She has a legacy that she wants to put into place, but she is also a tremendously damaged individual. She's somebody who suffered enormously in her childhood, whose brother disappeared in mysterious circumstances from school when he was a teenager, and she was there. But she doesn't remember anything about it because a traumatic event happened, but she wasn't able to articulate to the police exactly what had happened. And this is part of her secret, which needs to be unwrapped, because this is what made her who she is. She has become, in some ways, a ruthless monster, but is carrying this space inside her, which needs to be filled.
Well, I'm wondering with Rebecca or any of your characters when you're writing them, do you have an inner monologue? Can you hear your characters as you're writing them? Is that how that works for you?
I think it often is, yes. Because I usually write in the first person, and this book is written as a dialogue between these two main characters, both of them writing in the first person. It allows me to get into the head of that person, but also to be quite unreliable, because by definition, all narrators are unreliable, and Buckfast is particularly so, partly because she isn't entirely aware of the truth of what has happened. And so it gives me the opportunity to get characters to speak to themselves, to each other, but also to look directly at the reader and to speak to them, because it's clear when you read her narrative that some of what she is saying is going to Straightley, but some of it is going straight to you, the reader, and so you know more than either of these two characters really know. And that's a lot of fun to do as a writer. It allows me to take a number of camera angles, if you like, and to kind of play with the editing.
How do you develop such a complex character or personality in both your main characters here? How does that work for you?
Well, I think I usually start off by assuming that this has to be a real person. I have to believe in them. They're not a character really. They're people, and I have to get to know them in the way that I do people. And so I need to know about their past and what they care about and what they want, and what they would order from menus, and the things that have formed their personality. And when I've got a sort of general idea of that, if I'm lucky, the character sits up and starts to speak, and I can get their voice, and that way it's much easier to work out exactly what they would do in different circumstances. And of course, given that this is the story, at least partly, of a woman in a boys' grammar school in the 80s, I drew upon some of my own experiences, and I'm not saying that I'm at all like Rebecca Buckfast in many ways, but I did give her a number of anecdotes that happened to me, and which my ex-boys who follow me on Twitter and on social media have, of course, recognized.
Well, I wonder if maybe some of the characteristics of this character were things that it's a way of you acting out what you might have done.
Oh, some of it is, absolutely. Some of it is looking to see what would have happened if I had arrived at Leeds Grammar School and I hadn't just been a little innocent who had nothing to hide, but if I'd actually been an out-and-out psychopath, what would I have done? If I'd had no fear of consequence. But also, I think it was quite fun to revisit that time and to rebuild some of those memories and to work through them via the intermediary of another character with a different agenda and a different personality.
Would you say you have a relationship with the characters then? Like, I say this because a lot of fiction writers we talk to will say that their characters are like their family or like their children. They have some sort of a description like that. Do you kind of feel the same?
Well, I definitely feel that I have a relationship with them. I'm not sure if they're my family, but I certainly feel that I know them and that I have a relationship with them in that I am contributing to their development, but they're also somehow in some way contributing to mine, in some way going into the psychology of one of these, particularly some of these dark and challenging, complicated characters is a way of looking at some of the things about me and working through those.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm wondering, in the course of writing your books, have you ever had a character that's done anything to surprise you, kind of gone off the rails or done something that you weren't expecting?
Characters surprise me all the time. And they go off the rails all the time, too. I think the disadvantage of characters that come to life is that as soon as they've done that, you can't actually stop them from doing what they want to do. But usually I've learned that following them and listening to what they want and feeling what's intuitively right for their development is much more rewarding than trying to get them to run down the maze the right way, because as soon as a character starts to serve a plot too much and too conveniently, then they will lie down and not be alive anymore. So yes, it can be quite difficult. Sometimes it can be like juggling kittens, try to keep characters within the framework of a plot in as much as you don't want to be surprised too much. But yes, I'm always getting surprises, and I think it's a good thing. I mean, obviously when you're writing a book, it's quite nice if the reader is going to be surprised. But if you are surprised as the author, then it's almost certain that the reader will be surprised as well.
Why bring in a murder, so to speak, or a body? Do you have like a real interest in murder mysteries and that sort of genre?
I've always loved murder mysteries. I've always loved psychological thrillers. The 3 books that I've set at St. Oswald's are all murder mysteries in a sense, that they're all psychological thrillers. They're not procedurals in that way, but they are all about the secrets that people have and how the past impacts on the present. And I've always been very, very interested in that kind of story. Even the books that I've written that don't seem to be mysteries, they still are full of characters with secrets, and the past is always a very important thing. And I was brought up on Agatha Christie, as my grandfather used to call her. My French grandfather had a whole shelf full of Agatha Christie novels, and I read them all in French, and it took me until I was about 16 to realize that she wasn't actually a French writer. But I just happened to read all his detective books in French.
Now that brings me to this. What kind of research do you find yourself doing when you get into some sort of secret or mystery or a body being found? Do you actually kind of get into that in detail?
Well, I think with me, most of my research has already been done when I start to write a book, because what happens is I will have areas of interest which I'll occupy for a while, and I'll read about them, and then I will want to write a book about them. And so, if you like, there are certain intersecting modules, if you like, within this plot. One is obviously a community in a private school, which I know a lot about because I was in one. But it's also a community in the north of England, which has it's a mining community. Now, I was born in a mining community. I know the kind of psychology of these communities that are built on disused mines. I know a lot about old railway tunnels and old mines because that was where I played as a child. And so childhood and memories of childhood come into this a lot. And actually, you don't have to go very far to find a body. Not where I come from. I was born in a house that was built over a collapsed mine. There were 300 people who died there. about 150 years ago, and there was a story about them, and they had created their own legends. And so it was a place where, there were ghosts and bodies and secrets and myths, and all I had to do was to look around and pick them up.
When you have like 3 books and you say they're loosely tied together and kind of in a series, do you kind of already know what you want to do with your characters when you start writing up one of those books, or even did you kind of know how it was going to end, I guess, book 3 when you were beginning it?
No, I didn't. I think with these 3 books, which are built particularly on twists and revelations, I had only the dimmest idea of where I was going, because I wanted to be surprised by developments. And so I had a number of scenes planned out. The rest was still quite fluid. I had a number of ideas about where I might go. And usually I start off with a number of lesser ideas and one particularly audacious idea that I'm not sure I'm going to be able to carry off. And so I allow myself a number of escape routes if I'm not quite brave enough to follow the audacious idea. But actually, in the case of all 3 of these books, I followed it through to the end and hopefully made it work. But it's always a little uncertain whether somebody is going to spot that twist. And so I kind of try and fool myself that I'm not really going in that direction, and that I'm going in a different one.
Is there some sort of subtext under the story? Like the main storyline runs, but is there something you hope a reader would take away from the book besides the story?
I hope they'll take away lots of things, but I like mostly to ask questions rather than to provide the answers for them. I was in teaching for such a long time, and I told people what they ought to be learning and what conclusions they ought to be drawing from things. And now that I'm no longer in teaching, I much prefer to say, well, how did this make you feel? And why do you think this happened? And what would you have done in this person's place? I'd much rather people questioned than they came away with just one simple meaning. I don't think my books are like that.
Well, there are recurrent themes in your novels. I'm just wondering if that's something that you kind of, deliberately tease out, or do you think all that comes out unconsciously?
Well, it's not so much unconscious, but the themes that I write about are generally the things that I'm interested in. And if you look at the whole body of my work, you'll see that there are certain ideas that pop up all the time. And one is the woman in the face of the patriarchy, which is very much one of the themes of A Narrow Door, but it's also one of the themes of Chocolat. Except in Chocolat, the patriarchy happens to be the Catholic Church, and in A Narrow Door, it happens to be the private school system, but it's not all that different. And then you've got the small community under pressure, which can be a school, but it can also be a village, it can also be an island. So those things keep cropping up. And then there's also the role of the outsider. The idea that these communities, the volatile chemistry of these communities can be radically affected by the arrival of one key person who brings the drama, who brings the story and catalyzes the story. And those are interesting ideas. And they're pretty much in everything that I've written because I'm constantly retelling that story in different ways.
Every time you finish a book like this, do you feel like it's changed you somewhat?
I think always, yes, because books are like journeys, and they're journeys for the mind, but all journeys affect us and change us and hopefully allow us to grow.
It's interesting. Do you have something that you hope to get out of writing a book for yourself?
Well, I had 20 years ago a proper job that my mother approved of, with a pension and all the things that go with the stability of a job. And I gave it up to do this strange, unpredictable thing that leads who knows where. And I think that if I didn't get joy from doing that, there would be no reason for me to do it at all. So it always boils down to that for me, just joy.
Do you set yourself up in a structure? Like, how do you do your writing? Or can you set aside certain hours each day, like let's say 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and you can just sit down and start writing? Or do you have to be in a particular mood or feeling to write?
Well, I don't count hours and I don't count words, because I used to have a timetable, and it took me a long time to break myself of the habit of feeling that I had to sit down at a certain time and stop at another time. Nowadays, I don't do that anymore. I try to maximize the time that I've got, which isn't always as much as you'd think, because I used to write in my spare time when I was a teacher, but I found that the writerly stuff that doesn't actually involve writing nowadays takes up quite a lot of time. There's the journalism, and then there's the touring, and then there are the foreign trips, and there are all the other things that take me away from my desk, and so I still have to claw back time. But I find that what I try to do, whatever I'm doing and wherever I am, I try to write 300 words a day, which is not very much, but I try to do that every day, and obviously some days I'll do much more than that. But I think that if I can get a minimum down every day, then I will remain in the kind of headspace that I need to shape my plot and to get to know my characters. So it's much more about remaining in the headspace rather than writing thousands of words, because actually 300 words a day get you a first draft after a year anyway, as long as you do it every day, which is what I say to people when I'm teaching creative writing. People who rightly are a bit intimidated by the idea of writing a whole book and wonder how you start.
Well, you've mentioned also that you have synesthesia, if I'm pronouncing that right.
I do, yes.
When you smell colors. Do you find that helps your writing with like description and stuff, or do you find that it's an obstacle?
Well, I don't really have much of a basis for comparison, but I think it does help my writing because I experience the world primarily through colour and scent. This is why I suppose there's so much colour and scent in my writing, which is, I guess, a good thing, because what I really like about writing is the possibility of full immersion for the reader, which means not just talking about what they can see, but also trying to bring the other senses into the story too, and to try and make them feel as if they're actually there. And if I can feel that, then maybe I could get the reader to feel that too. When I'm in my shed, which is my favorite workspace, I am surrounded by bright colors and bright lights, because those are the things that tend to give me energy. And every book that I write has a scent. It's my one hack for getting into the headspace when I'm not in my shed and I'm not surrounded by familiar things. But I find that scent particularly makes it easy for me to access the work. So I will allocate a scent for each book that I write, and I'll wear it and have it around me when I want to be there in the space working. And I find that it's the quickest way of becoming emotionally receptive to what I'm doing.
Did you ever look back at some of your older books, the beginning books, before you sort of made it, so to speak, and want to rewrite them?
No, I don't want to rewrite them, but I do think, oh, how the hell did I write that? Or why did I write that in that way? But no, I think going back to things and reworking them it's as pointless as looking at the photographs of the embarrassing stuff you wore in the 80s and trying to Photoshop it to make it look more acceptable. It's part of a time. I'm fond of them because they are representative of that time. I wouldn't want to change them, but I wouldn't write them again in the same way now, which is, I guess, a good thing, because I hope I'm always trying to improve and be better. And I still hope that I'm on a kind of learning journey. I don't think that I'm ever going to stop.
Where do you see yourself going with these books? Like, you're going to keep kind of doing the same series here, or do you find you're going to go all over the place?
I don't know. I've been going all over the place for so long now that I guess I'll keep doing that. But I do find that I return to certain characters and to certain environments. And so it's quite possible that I will write another St. Oswald's book at some point, but not yet. I think right now I'm working on something different, which is standalone. But I do like to write about communities that I've already built. And so the thing that I'm writing now is actually set at least partly in the same town as A Narrow Door, although it doesn't have any of the same characters. And just from time to time, people who know my other books will go, yes, I know that place. And that will mean something. It will mean that the books are communicating to each other somehow. But no, I don't stay on the same path all the time. I like to diversify.
Well, I was wondering too. Like earlier, we were talking about Chocolat as a film, and I know you've also written scripts. What's your experience been with the movie business? And did you have input, or is it more like most authors? It's kind of hands off.
Well, I was asked if I wanted to write the script, and I said no, which was very sensible because at the time I hadn't even given up teaching, and I had a small child, and honestly, the idea of jetting off to LA for script meetings, I just couldn't imagine it. I haven't even read a movie script, let alone written one, so I let somebody else write it, which was very sensible, and I just enjoyed the ride. Nowadays, I would feel more confident to write the script, and it would be a different thing. But I'm not in a great hurry to do this. And to me, it's such a different mode of storytelling that I'm very happy to just do what I do and to let other people do what they do and to take it into a different medium if they want to. But it's not a world that I would feel super comfortable inhabiting. It seems very cutthroat and difficult and full of potential drama. I only met Harvey Weinstein once, but he was definitely potential drama.
Well, yeah, and more.
Yes, well, quite. You know, the first thing he said to me, I was at a party and I met him. I was introduced to him. And the first thing he said to me was, "Hello, I'm Harvey Weinstein, and when I come into a room, authors..."
How dare you?
...their pants. So there was a little moment of silence, and I said, "In which case, Harvey, you've got my next dry cleaning bill." And he laughed, and I laughed, and he moved on, and that was our interaction. But I thought, wow, I'm so glad he's not my boss.
Oh, yeah. Oh, at least he didn't ask you to come back to the hotel room.
Well, quite. I don't think he was my type somehow.
Who are your favorite authors? Who do you like to read?
Oh, I read all sorts of people. I read a lot of new books because people send me proofs of new books, and I reread a lot of authors that I've loved. I still reread a lot of Ray Bradbury, for instance, who I've loved since I was 9. And the books that I go back to are generally books that change. There are some books you go back to them and they haven't changed at all, and you think, okay, I can leave them now. And there are other books where the perspective of being an older person with a different life experience gives you more to find in that book, and I love those books, and so I go back to them. And I like reading new stuff too. I'm constantly discovering new authors that I enjoy.
Now, if someone has never read one of your books before, what one book would you tell them would give them a good feel for your type of writing?
That's a difficult one because I think it depends very much on the mood of the person and what they're like. I have books that are outright fantasy, like The Gospel of Loki, which is basically, Norse gods. Books that are, I would say, probably magic realism, like Chocolat. And books that are firmly set in the real world, like A Narrow Door. So it really depends what people like. But I've written 2 collections of short stories which are full of all kinds of things. So I would say, I guess, that if people want to get an idea of where I could go, to read one of those.
Do you do anything to relax and recharge or even decompress between chapters or novels when you're done?
Oh, well, I'm never done. But I do decompress. I mean, usually I'm writing 2 books at a time so that I never get done. I think I rather fear that kind of lacuna at the end of a book where you don't know where you're going next. And so I always make sure that I'm writing several projects kind of side by side so that when one's finished, I can segue into the next thing. And there's always a work in progress. But yes, I do all sorts of things to decompress. I run. which gets me out in the open and means that I'm not slumped over a laptop all day. And I've got a big garden, and I'm lucky to have that. And I spend time in there, and I'm in a band, and we play music and write music together, and have a stage show, which hopefully now lockdown is over, we'll be able to go back to and do gigs, because it is quite nice to. It's a very solitary thing, writing books, and sometimes it's quite nice to be creative with other creative people.
How was the COVID on your writing? Like, do you think that having all of the let's say unusual events in the last couple of years, does it sort of affect your writing in a way of making it maybe a little darker, or what's your thoughts?
Well, it's curious. I think that everything that happens to me and everything that happens around me gets filtered. And so it's not so much something that I can perceive and I can go, yes, lockdown did this to me, but it's a change in the lighting, perhaps. So I think, yes, inevitably, there will have been some effect. Actually, the first year of lockdown I thought was quite, it was quite nice in some ways for me, because apart from the awful stuff that was happening outside, it was the first time I'd had the chance to be at home for long periods of time in 20 years. And it was new and strange. It was being like cast away on a desert island. And so I did a lot of work. I know a lot of people who were not able to work and who were so stressed by events that they weren't able to do anything. But actually, I found it quite easy to just disappear into the page and work. And in the second year, I got cancer, so it was mostly about that. And it was mostly about going through chemo and radio. And so I had 1 year of, but that didn't stop me writing either. And now that that's gone and hopefully gone for good, then I'm looking at another new normal, but what that will be, who knows? But yes, everything will eventually get spun into story in some form. I'm just never sure how that will happen.
Yeah, it's strange, and social media, the new world of being online and connected to a lot of people, including fans and readers and stuff like that. How is it you get along with that?
Well, I found that during lockdown it was a very interesting thing, because I was basically in my big house and my garden with nothing but my husband, and I wasn't seeing anybody. And so social media was my window on the world. And that was where I went to have conversations and to share experiences and I kind of see it. I see it in the same way that I used to see the staff room when I was a teacher. It was a kind of a place where between lessons, you just kind of wandered in there, read half a page of the paper, said hello to a few people, and then wandered back to work. And it was an important human interaction that didn't have to last a long time, but it's still important for me, at least, to have the sort of human stimulus that makes stories happen, because my stories are all about people and relationships. And I think if I lost touch with that, then I would find it very difficult to function. And so, yes, in many ways, it kept me in touch with things. And then later, when I was going through my treatments and I just announced to the world, yes, I'm going through this, I found I did this initially because I was just thinking, well, it will make it easier if I announce to everybody and I won't have to keep saying it to people. But I found that a lot of people wanted to share their experiences and felt that it was liberating to be able to do it, because in some way they felt that I'd given them permission to talk about it, which is never a bad thing, because I don't think women particularly find it easy to talk about these experiences without feeling that there's a supportive network. And online, you find that.
So how do people get a hold of you? Like, what's your favorite social media, and do you have a website?
I have a website at joanneharris.com, and I'm on Twitter. Twitter is, my daughter tells me, my natural home, and I'm Joanne Chocolat on there. And usually that's where people can find me. I talk to most people if I can. I don't follow everybody back, but I usually interact if they will. And people tend to ask me questions about all kinds of things. They ask me about writing and how to get an editor and this kind of thing, or they'll talk to me about my books, or, anything really. It's quite nice in that it feels like a social network rather than a professional one. And I do like that, because I've never felt that social media was necessarily a great way to go out and sell books, even assuming that I was able to do that.
Yeah. It's a tough business. It's certainly changed it. Do you like the new publishing world? With the Amazon and all of the social media and stuff. Do you kind of like the way it's gone since the 90s?
Well, I'm not sure like is the term. I think there are a lot of really excellent new opportunities for new writers, and I think the world of self-publishing is a very interesting one, and is in some way a means of leveling the playing field and allowing for more diversity and more inclusivity within the publishing world, because I think publishing has become calcified in some ways. Traditional publishers are becoming much more risk averse, much less likely to take a punt on something that they think is niche. But I think there's an increasing demand for diverse fiction. And so where is that going to go? It will go into self-publishing. It will go into different areas. So I think that is interesting, and that's dynamic and good. I think one of the unfortunate knock-on effects, though, is that authors are being paid less and less, while publishers seem to be making more and more. And this is something that I think needs addressing, because unless you're one of the select lucky few, it's rare for somebody to make money out of writing books. And we should be concerned about this.
Yeah. Should be getting better, not worse. But that's kind of what's going on right now. So, any other author you'd like to work with?
Oh wow! Well, most of my heroes are either dead or not very well. I think I'd quite like to work with Neil Gaiman. He and I have a sort of running joke that we were separated at birth, and that we had a great number of early influences in common, although we approached the business in very different ways. He would be fun to work with. I would quite like to work with my old friend Christopher Fowler, who is my first and dearest friend in the publishing business, and he writes wonderful crime novels and horror novels. But I think he and I would make a good team. He writes the Bryanton May books, and he is the person who knows London best of all, and so it would be quite nice for us to write something together set in London, and I could write the female characters and he could write the male ones, because that would be fun.
What would you suggest actually for someone that's that is writing at home and doing a job and all of that, but would like to get into the world of writing and being published? What would you say the best piece of advice is?
Well, the best piece of advice is don't give up your day job until you're absolutely ready to do it, and in some cases, don't give it up at all, because sometimes it's just not going to be possible to make a living writing full time, and you don't have to. You don't have to write full time to be a writer. I wasn't a full time writer, and I published 3 books. But I think the important thing is to keep hold of why you're doing it, because I think I meet quite a lot of people who want to write because they want to be published, and they want the things that they think being published is going to give them. But those things are not necessarily accurate things. I think if you don't love writing, and if you don't want to do a lot of it, then perhaps writing isn't for you, because honestly, 99% of being a writer is still writing. And so if you don't like writing, then there's probably something out there that will suit you better.
Yeah, and you're not saying that it's not work or it's not hard work. It's just about loving doing it.
I think so, yes, because there are so many potential knockbacks and rejections and disappointments and frustrations involved in being published that if you don't love what you do, there will be nothing to sustain you. And so loving what you do is I think an essential. And also loving books, loving reading. I meet a lot of would-be writers who have no time to read and who think that the reading bit is optional, but it's not. You have to consume art to be able to produce art.
Well said. Well, on that note, we're out of time. So it's been a real pleasure getting to know you a little bit and talking about your writing. And now the book everyone should run out and buy right now. It's called A Narrow Door. And the author is our guest, Joanne Harris. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Alan. I've really enjoyed our chat.
Thanks, Joanne.
Tired of wasting time trying to decide what to watch on your streaming service? Go to our website and look for the Martino movie reviews.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
The mission has been completed.
The end! By George, he's got it! It is the end! I'll say it.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.